I just had the pleasure of interviewing Marek Lehocky. He's an ocean lover like myself, and he just completed a staged circumnavigation swim around the island of Oahu. He did this with his swimming partner, Dr. Stephen Minaglia, and this is the first unassisted circumnavigation of the island on record. Marek, he's originally from Slovakia, but he resides now here in Honolulu. He's the CEO of Kreston ProWorks. It's a business support services company based out of Tokyo, Japan. During our conversation, we delved into various topics, such as his upbringing, his love of the ocean, the importance of goal setting and transnational business, breathing, perseverance, and his insight into these topics. He brings a unique cultural lens to the conversation, which I thought was invaluable in understanding and navigating the complexities of the modern world. I thought it was interesting, and I hope it sets your goals forward. I hope you learn to take from him his experience, and I thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Marek, well, good morning, and thank you for meeting with me today. So tell me about this rough ocean today. What's it like, the ocean today?
Oh, yes. Good morning, Robert. It's great. When ocean is rough, typically what that means is there's no boats, there's no surfers, there's just big waves, strong current. We have some jellyfish in the water today, man of war. Actually, not a jellyfish, it's man of war. And it's just wild. It cleans your head, it cleans your body, mind, everything. It's just great. And after 4 days of being sick, it was just great to be back in the water.
So how far did you swim today?
Not really far because I had to dial in to speak with you. So I only did about 2 miles out of the Hilton hotel side towards Diamond Head.
Nice. And how long have you been swimming, Marek?
Well, I started swimming when I was 5. That goes back to Eastern Europe, the old Russian school times. So that was very intense for quite a few years. Then I stopped swimming after my teenage years, being fed up with being pushed too much. And I came back to swimming when I was back in Hawaii, say about 6 years ago. So there was quite a big gap when I could not feel, smell on seawater for a couple of years. Yeah.
So in Eastern Europe, where were you swimming?
Yeah, so a little bit of a background. I was born and raised in Eastern Europe in Slovakia, which is part of former Czechoslovakia, as people may know it. It was part of the Soviet bloc, but not as many people think that it was part of the Soviet Union. We were just kind of under the extended wings, which is what I guess the current president is trying to reestablish again with all the craziness. But so it was Eastern Europe, Slovakia, but the whole programs and everything was kind of ran by the whole USSR type of methodology. So it was very intense. It was part of the Cold War kind of approach as well. So if you're participating in any competitive sport, you're part of the competition with the West, so to speak. So yeah, that was when I was 5, and then it continued until I was about 14. Strictly in pool, it was really competitive. So it's to, in a short period of time, get as strong as you can and win as much as you can type of approach. So it was very technical.
I'm curious, growing up in the East, I guess, under kind of a Soviet system or a Soviet model, what would you say some of the positives of that kind of structure were in terms of education or sports or anything like that?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, like any kids, I was a kid. So when the whole thing ended, which was 1989 with what they called Velvet Revolution, and maybe it took us 2 more years to get the Russians out completely, all the troops move out. Basically, when you're a child, you find fun in everything and anything. It's just, you just need the environment, and you probably know it through your own daughter that, whatever you have, it's fun. And so what we had then was a lot of free time. The school system was quite strict and quite structured, but at the same time, it had elements of what, school systems like Montessori have now. So we had a lot of hands-on. We had a lot of, say, gardening type of stuff, cooking, and all type of things. So we learned a lot. And so it was interesting for us. The sports sides of things in schools was really good as well, because there were clubs after school, the schooling system, first of all, was free. So that's a phenomenal thing when you come to think of it. And it's not on the level of, say, public school system here. It was all the way through evening if you wanted. So any clubs, whether it was sports, arts, science in the afternoon, it was all free. And so that's why also there was quite a wide pool of talent coming out of Eastern Europe. And if you watched Olympics, it was quite competitive then. And as I said, partially it was driven by the fact that it was part of the Cold War kind of thinking as well. But also what was good, that I think the communists were kind of smart in a way that they knew that they cannot pay people much. So they have to give them different pleasures. They have to educate the people really well, so they're good workforce. And to keep their minds occupied, they give us programs, right? So things were for free. So while people couldn't travel, couldn't have what people had in the West, we had things like, free education, free medical system. We had 3 camps, what equivalent of Boy Scouts type of things. We had quite intense military training, which for boys, it's like, it's equivalent of modern, I guess, video games, but they're live, with military involved, and you go out and you play with small grenades and run around and shoot air guns and stuff like that. So for boys, it's cool. So that was really cool. And we had a lot of time for each other and a lot of freedom. Schools, basically, there was only one school that you could go to, which was the closest to your house, which I believe is very close to what the current school system in Finland is about. So you basically went to school with your buddies. So you were well connected. You went with people from different levels of life and different, with different backgrounds. So we learned how to deal with each other. And after school, we either went to clubs or we went home, which was very safe anyway. And we played outside for hours and hours, which is a big challenge in today's society. So we had fun. So that was a great thing, I think.
What was the language learning? Was this in Slovakian? Did you learn Russian or English or German, other languages?
Well, in a nutshell, it was Russian as a foreign language, obviously, because that was the mother Russia kind of thing that they were presenting to us. But from what I recall, not just how I felt, but also my friends, we were not really keen on, because it's like with anything, with people in general, and particularly with kids and even animals, when the push approach doesn't work, right? It has to be pull, but it was more on the push side. So we didn't really like learning Russian. The good part was that it was part of the Slavic group of languages, even though it was on the opposite side of the spectrum. It was easy for us to learn in a way. So we learned it. Now, there were a few courses in English and German, but you have to remember that anything related to the West of Central Europe, so to speak, was enemy, because it had different ideology, right? And any ideology, including, say, even Christianity and so on, was competing with the communist ideas and ideology. So there wasn't a lot of that, but there were some people who were able to speak German and English a little bit. But again, for the communists, that was an opportunity, or they saw it as an opportunity for people to connect with the West, which they didn't want even more. So it was quite limited.
And then, Marek, how old are you when the Soviet bloc collapsed and the Czech Republic broke apart?
Yeah, so it all started with the Berlin Wall, which was 1989, if I remember. And soon after, the Velvet Revolution, which started in Prague, in the former Czechoslovakian capital, that was basically a students' kind of small gathering, and they got pushed back quite heavily by the police. And suddenly, there's a still question till date whether it was the communist managed exit or it was just really as intense as it was. But suddenly there were videotapes being distributed of that sort of oppression, of that uprising of the students in Prague to all schools. And what happened was we all sat in whether it was, cafeterias or somewhere. And we basically said, no, we started jingling keys because somebody came up with it, telling the communists, okay, it's time for you to give us the keys from the country. And that was when I was 14. So the difference between, say, how it happens, how the overturn of the communist regimes happened in other countries, in Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, it happened through young people, and then artists joined us. And so we're out in the street at the age of 14, 15, 16, which was interesting.
Then, Marek, how did you immediately then move or have interest in the West then, or what was that like?
No, absolutely not. No, well, we of course we were hungry, so we wanted to get to know things. We wanted to have things, and we did have a little bit of a edge because the communists did have exchange programs for some of the workers going to, say, like Libya, sort of that communist regime friendly countries, and they were paid in what they call bonds, not equivalent of the bonds that here, but it was just basically a fake currency that they could control. And then there were special stores that had like Levi jeans and all that kind of stuff. So if you had the bonds, you could go and buy stuff. There was maybe one per bigger city or town. So we knew what the taste, what the West tastes like and smells like. But when the borders opened up, obviously we were still second-class citizens. We were not part of the EU. We were just kind of between, and the West was very cautious. They didn't want to get flooded with Eastern Europeans. So it wasn't as easy from the beginning. But yeah, I mean, we were all interested. I was a rock climber at that time. So I switched very quickly from swimming to rock climbing. And that took me around Europe. We used to take old cars and just drive them around Europe, climb, and then go to the seaside, ocean side. And that was the first time when I kind of tasted the ocean. And I started kind of looking out, thinking, yeah, this is what I like. I want to swim in the ocean.
And then just to iterate, how did you end up in the US then? What is your trajectory there? Maybe we can talk about Japan too and your interest in that.
It's all kind of connected. So I did finish my first master's in Slovakia, which was in Japanese intercultural communication and diplomacy related. It was master's and bachelor's degree together. So I was about 24 when I finished that. I learned English when I was 18. So I went to a language school, very intense language school. So for a year, I didn't go to university. And I just focused on learning English because I could see a lot of opportunities in Eastern Europe. Just to describe what was happening around then, which is about 3-4 years after we changed the system, or we started changing the system, because it's still sort of changing in Eastern Europe. But everything that you can imagine looking out of the window now, wherever you are, you can just look outside and imagine that everything belongs to the country today. And tomorrow, everything is available to anybody who will raise their hand. Like, I want this. The problem was that people were very risk adverse because obviously they lived on, salary that would barely get them by month to month, which is how it was controlled by the communists. So even if you had a chance to buy a factory or to buy your convenience store looking like small shop, mom and pops looking like shop, or anything, or say car shop, very few people would actually raise their hand. So there was a lot of activity among just a few small group of people who would participate in what was called privatization process and basically getting assets and so on for free. So that's where I felt that I need to learn English. And at 18, when I was being asked by my friends to help them with joint ventures and so on, I knew that English was something that was going to set me free from and allow me to travel around the world. So that was the first thing. And second step, I took that master's and bachelor's together. So at 24, when I was about to graduate, I was approached by a Japanese company.
Wait, Marek, one step in. So you're 18 learning English, and then you choose to do a career in Japanese. Where does the interest in Japan come from? I mean, Japan is kind of a far away, very, very far place from Slovakia. So I'm just curious where that came from and where that.
How much time do we have? But, yes. So originally, I always wanted to be an MD, a medical doctor. It happens that my older brother is a surgeon and he's traveled around the world, and he's the smart one in the family. So watching him, I kind of started to have second thoughts. But anyway, when I was about 18, for some reason, I decided not to pursue a medical degree and started thinking about what to do. And so the next one was obviously alternative medicine. And in Slovakia, there were not many people. Actually, there was only one really famous person who did acupuncture and similar things. And she was quite famous even in the Chinese community, that was very limited, but was in Slovakia and also in the scientific world. But the problem was that she would not teach anybody. And so I spent about 6 months. I liked the idea of being close to the real medicine, but doing something alternative. And we always had, our eyes on Asia at that time, and particularly Japan. The view of Japan was very different from the rest of Asia. There was Asia for us, and then there was Japan. And I find that's quite similar across the world, because Japan, of the sophistication, and because where they were during the bubble era and the development and how they were able to turn the economy and environment and everything around from the 70s to the 80s. So the late 80s, it was economic power. It was culturally very interesting. It was sophisticated. And we also had this running joke that if the communists were really to look for the ideal country for communism, that would be Japan, because probably with the right leader, people would, they were told like, okay, from tomorrow, you're going to do this. People would just go hi and would follow. So there was also interest there. But with the alternative medicine, it wasn't really still connecting to that extent. But so when I actually finally got that lady to agree to become my tutor, a fate took control, and she suddenly passed away 2 weeks later, sudden death. And that was an eye opener and kind of a closing to my whole MD kind of medical field career chapter. I just thought, yeah, that's a higher calling, telling me that maybe not pursue. And my climbing partner at that time, just several days later, just out of the blue, came with a book on Japanese characters. That was probably the first one printed in Czech, and I think Czech and Japanese, on Japanese characters. And he just said, well, I just saw this in a store. For some reason, I thought of you and I bought it. Here it is. Deal with it. I don't know why I bought it, but here it is. I just thought of you. And he just threw it in front of me. So I started looking through the book, and then that was probably the moment that when things started connecting with Japan and interest in Japan. When I decided to depart from the medical field, and I just said, okay, I'm going to go for business. But if I do business, I want to make sure that it's something that will give me a skill set that I will not have to look for work, but work will look for me. So I started looking around more, and I realized that actually the first foreign investor in Slovakia was from Japan. It was a car manufacturer or car parts manufacturer, quite a large one with over 100,000 employees around the world. And they created a joint venture with a Slovak partner. And I did a little bit more research, and I actually learned that there are not many, if any, people in Slovakia who, in fact, speak Japanese. I thought, well, okay, this is it. I'm interested in Asia. It's still a nation that is closer to human side of things than the Western cultures are, and also it's something that can give me an advantage in Slovakia. So I looked for school. First, I found out that the only school was in Prague, in Czech Republic, and the oldest school, the Charles University. I did actually apply. I went there, and I quit after a month when I learned that basically the teachers took advantage of the market, that there were Japanese companies coming to Prague and to the Czech Republic first, because obviously they were closer to the west, to the German border. And so they took all the gigs, and I felt that they were not teaching us enough. Probably, at least that's what I felt, that they didn't want to create more competition around them. So I didn't like that approach. I left. And luckily, Slovakia and Itochu Corporation had an agreement that they would invest money and they would start the same thing in Slovakia. So first time ever, they announced that there would be a master's degree in Japanese, and they connected with intercultural communications and diplomacy. And I was lucky enough to get in. First, it was supposed to be 6 people, but we ended up being 2 guys and 18 girls for 6 years as a cohort group. And we had some Slovak teachers, but we mainly had a Japanese teacher who was a very interesting descent of samurai, one of the fighting samurai clan families. So her whole family was very traditional in education and approach to life. And I was very lucky to learn a lot from her. And that's how I connected myself to Japan and the whole Asian part of myself.
Fascinating. So your friend, if he hadn't bought you that kanji book, I mean, your life might be different.
Absolutely.
I mean, what an amazing, and then at what level, I mean, there's the N5 to N1. What level did you get to with that kind of Japanese level?
Well, the school was intense. It was very intense. And as I said, imagine that you have a samurai's top woman
Plus the Soviet
being a teacher.
kind of encouragement. Yeah, you have.
Yeah, she was extremely strict, and she also happened to work as an announcer, TV announcer for many years. So she was just impeccable. Her cultural background, education, upbringing was just super strict, very traditional Japanese. But also her skills were great. And basically the way that she approached us, the very first day she said in Japanese, which was very ironic, she says, it's more important to learn how to speak in English with Japanese mind than to speak Japanese with a foreigner or English mind in order to survive and get by in Japan. And so they kind of set a message on what she was going to teach us, that Japan is not about the language, but it's about the social, cultural aspect of things and understanding how the culture works, that there's much deeper side of the whole culture. And it's not just in Japan. I believe that in general, in Asia, it's quite the case. So that was one thing. And the second thing was basically she came to us and said, Marek, this is just between us, but I only have 2 students. And mind you, again, I said that there were 18 girls and 2 guys, because again, how culturally it is positioned. That her mission was to bring up 2 guys who can lead the business side of things and the relationship side of things, because Japan at that time, and then probably even now still, is largely patriarchal. I think it's the right word. So she put a lot of energy into us. And the third thing was, Marek, if you don't come to eat dinner at my house, and she was married with 2 kids, one of who was actually our classmate, she said, you will not finish this school. And that was, again, another extended way of teaching me the culture and being part of a family, see how to eat, learn how to eat, how to prepare, how to function within the Japanese society. So I was very, very lucky in that sense.
And then when was your first visit to Japan?
That was, I think, that was during my studies. So the studies were 6 years. It's quite intense. And just to finish answering your question, we went all the way. So 6 years, you can imagine, it's a lot. And first 3-4 years, I could not put a full sentence together. And the reason was because we set a really broad base for the language. As you may know, Japanese has many different levels of language, whether it's the children's language, women, and then the honorific, and so on. So we were basically learning. It's like building a big wall, and you start setting the foundations, and you put the first level of bricks, second level of bricks. But in order to be able to complete sentence, you have to reach, say, I don't know, a floor at least, right? And it took us, because we're going on the full extent of the language from left to right. We're building the vocabulary, we're building the grammar that is different with the different levels of language, and the socio linguistic aspects as well of that, and how you pick the language that you use, or the different types of language when you use it, and also how you behave in those contexts. So it took us about 3 to 4 years when we finally were able to, when it all rounded up for us and we were able to speak. But once we were able to speak, we were able to speak on all different levels. And that was just an amazing thing for me. So when I was about 4th grade, we were quite there, and with kanji as well, we learned over 2,000 kanji handwriting, obviously, as well, because of the technology not being available too much then there. So we were quite advanced, and then we started passing all the exams. So we went all the EQ. We went straight to EQ. We did not. I think we were exempt or something. I don't remember. But then we also went to Budapest for that, and we also passed the Monbusho test, which is the Ministry of Education in Japan, and that's geared towards Japanese who try to get certified on a higher level of Japanese sort of command of the language. And that was by the end of the 6th year.
It's crazy, especially since you're studying not in Japan, so you don't have the resource base to have it full immersion. So that's actually even more challenging.
It was very interesting to first time travel to Japan, which is to answer your second question. It was when I was in my 5th grade, I think. I was asked to join the Ministry of Culture of Slovakia, because Slovakia is known for what they call Biennale of Fantasy. And it's a once a year an exhibit of children's book illustrations from all around the world, the best of them. And apparently some group of Japanese came along and they really loved it. So they went back home, they got some funding, they built a gallery specifically for that. And once they built it, they came to Slovakia and said, look, we built this gallery. Please let us bring this exhibition to the Japanese children and people. And so they made an exemption and they did it. And so they asked me to be on tour with them and then bring that exhibition to Japan. So that was my first time in Japan. And I freaked out on the plane because I had never met any Korean people before. And I had no idea what Korean sounds like. And I had no idea what the differences are. But I was sitting on a straight flight from Vienna to I think Osaka the first time. And there was a group of young people sitting in front of me, and I didn't know they were Koreans, but they were speaking. And I don't know if you know, but there's some words that sound like Japanese, but you cannot just make out of it what it is. So I'm sitting there, I'm listening. I'm like, oh my goodness, is this what I'm supposed to be interpreting from? Because I had no idea what they were talking about. So this is real Japanese. So I've just lived in a bubble for this whole 5 years, and this is just not good at all. Luckily, to my surprise, when I came out of the plane and people came, the real Japanese, I could understand everything. And I was so confused. So I asked my friend, who's daughter of my teacher, and like, who are these people? Why do they speak such strange accent? He's like, oh, because they're Korean. So it was in a very interesting kind of connection with, being the lab mouse or mice coming out to the real world, like, and realizing that, okay, you're fine, even though we were in the lab kind of conditions, under lab conditions for 5 years, but you will kind of get by. And then it just started all connecting, obviously, in Japan.
What was the culture shock like at that moment? None?
We were gods. We were gods in Japan. Like this is going back to
90s,
going back 25 years, like 90s, right? So obviously I was American, right? So that was one thing that there was nobody, like anybody who was white, who was tall, long legs and big nose was American. And it was interesting because we were never superstars, we're the underdog in Eastern Europe. So coming out to Japan and all of a sudden literally people coming to me left and right, particularly when we were in Shikoku, because that's where in Kochi, where the exhibit was taken. They were not used to foreigners at that time at all on a sort of unofficial side of things. So they were coming and asking me if they can touch my nose, if they can, measure their legs against me. And it was very interesting. So that was first cultural shock. The second was food. It was just, for me, coming from Eastern Europe, where really the choices are quite limited, right? Because again, we didn't have import of things. We didn't have good fish. We only had carp and stuff like that, like stinky pond fish and stuff like that. So when I went there and I started smelling and tasting the new foods, it was just amazing, and it will stay in my head and mind forever. I think that was the biggest thing. Everything else was very cool because, like I mentioned in the beginning, and as we said, that we thought that Japan was the best country for communists to take over if some evil communists were to come and take over. It was exactly like that because it was very similar to what we grew up in. It's very systematic. It's very process-based. So if you follow the process and you don't stick out of the line, it's very easy to navigate. But the difference between the Eastern Europe and Japan was that it was sophisticated and to quite a great extent free. There was nobody kind of putting you back in line. So it was very enjoyable for me. It was just coming back home, but very sophisticated, modern, clean, and nice home. So that was when, I don't know if it's a cultural shock, but it was very nice kind of realization that, yeah, this is a country I could live in.
No, I think the thing that's so great about Japan is that it's such an alternative system that works in such a great way. So it's such a counter to the West and to other models. Obviously, if you go to India or something, it's a different system entirely, but it's harder to appreciate at the first glance, that culture, for instance.
Yeah, so we don't have problem with following the system. It's actually extremely easy system to live in. It's only when you start questioning things. But again, being in a developed society, though it's still Asian society, and I apologize if it sounds bad, but there's still limitation. But it's also open, right? It's been under influence of the Western society, and they've been really good at taking over quite a few systems. Like the accounting system is based on Germany, legal system is based on Germany very close, and so on and so on. So you can see that, and thinking as well. So you can fall out of the system and you can be a foreigner. You can, and I actually apply it quite often. So I can be very Japanese, I believe, and I can also be very foreigner, just to kind of push things through, initiatives through. So that's a great part of Japan, that you don't get shot for that, that you actually still have that.
Well, most of my Japanese friends it's maybe easier to be a gaijin, a foreigner in Japan, than actually being a Japanese, unless you're really willing to break the rules.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So it's selective passing, especially with your language skills. You can become a foreigner if you need to, or become fully Japanese in Keigo or whatever you need to, according to the setting. Let's go back, Marek, to your swimming for a second before we go back to Japan. I can see how you have the endurance now to, do a daily practice of swimming. And tell me about your latest adventure swimming and your, congratulations on achieving your goal. But tell us about that.
Well, that was, so we called it Swim Around Oahu. So Oahu is an island here in Hawaii. It's about 135 miles to circumnavigate, swim. That island it was never done before, except for one surfer who claimed doing it, but it was sort of a combination of crossing certain sections by boat and having fins on and so on and so on. So it was never really done properly. And I think he did it in some sort of effort to bring attention to ocean and what's happening basically with the whole habitat. But what I do is it's not necessarily practice for me. It's more like, it's like my shrine in a way. You could describe it to people going to shrine, that, I just need to clear my head. I work through all different time zones here in Hawaii. And so it happens that I work till late or work in the morning. So I do need to switch out of things. And the ocean is just the best thing. Yes, people tell me that how can you, and it's really, I'm afraid of sharks, and you're afraid of jellies or the currents or the boats. But that's the thing that, we, for example, we probably don't think about the risks we take then when we sit in a car and we're on H1 highway driving. And when you actually pay attention to how many accidents there are and how many people die a year on H1. And it's just that's one short stretch of highway in Hawaii that has 45 miles an hour speed limit. And you put it into perspective, how many people die swimming in the ocean who are actual swimmers. I'm not talking about the tourists who don't know what they're doing. It's fairly safe, I think, statistically, and particularly if you practice a lot. But it's the mental kind of cleansing that you get, because obviously if you're a normal person, you do feel fears, you do feel anxieties, there are all different kinds of stimulus in the ocean. And just like this morning, when the waves are coming at you from left and right to the point where there's absolutely no boats, no surface. So the ocean was very interesting this morning, and the winds are supposed to be 50 to 80 miles an hour today. So the ocean really is out there. But when we decided to do this swim, we used to do, and I still do from time to time, channel crossings. And the closest ones that I've done are here in Hawaii, islands of Maui and Lanai and Molokai. It's a triangle of islands, approximately all between about 10 to 12 miles, depending on the line that you can hold, and which is decided by the currents and the waves and the conditions and wind on that day when you swim. But it's a project. It's always a project, because you have to plan, you have to have a boat, you have to travel somewhere. And I happen to have 11, soon to be 12, and an 8-year-old children at home, and I like to spend time with them. So it's been difficult for me to take the time away, particularly when I have to travel to Japan and other parts of the world for business. So I came up with this project I was just looking around, seeing on the beach and thinking, well, I have this greatest swim ever here. Nobody's done it before. And I get to know my island. There's some challenging parts, obviously, what I call the corners of the island. So there's a sticking out parts of the island, which, from what I researched before we did the swim, are always challenges, because we're in the middle of the Pacific. So if you really look at Hawaii and you look at the current map, the waters hitting those corners can be pretty crazy. So I knew that we would have enough adrenaline doing that. And then also the most appealing part was that we can do it on our own time. We don't need a boat, and we can sort of do a pioneer kind of approach where it was just 2 guys, 2 cars. And we'll try to see how far we can go, supporting ourselves, bringing water in our suits and some gels, and just go. So plan ahead. and do the swim. So we ended up taking 24 swims to cover the 135 miles over 72 hours total to swim, circumnavigate Oahu between, it was March and November last year. Why it took so long? It's because my partner happens to be a very busy OBGYN surgeon at the Queen's Hospital here. And also I travel a lot. I spend almost 4 months out of that time outside of the country. So just physically impossible. But whenever we were in the country and we had time, we just took off and we would swim. Average swims would be about 6 miles at a time. So it was pretty interesting.
How did those compare in challenge towards the channel crossings? Was this easier in terms of swimming or harder? I'm just curious.
It depends on challenge. It depends on the challenge, on the channels. Sorry. You have, say, North Channel, or you have Cook Strait in New Zealand, right? Which is very challenging because of the currents and particularly because of the temperature. So for people coming out of Hawaii, it's a super challenging swim, and you cannot compare because you would have to use cold baths and ice baths and so on to adapt your body to cold water environment. So it really is difficult. But on the contrary, we had guys coming from Europe who were trying to do a double Kaiwi crossing, which is the channel between Honolulu and Molokai, 42 kilometers one way. So it'd be almost 100-kilometer swim. They wanted to do a relay both ways. They gave up after the first hour, basically saying that the ocean is too hot. They could not breathe because they're exactly the opposite type of swimmers. So for them, Hawaii was challenging. For me, I could not swim the North Channel without actually relocating there for a couple of months and getting used to that temperature. So it's hard to compare on that level. In terms of intensity, I think Hawaii has different type of water, first of all. So really the ocean it's an element, much stronger element compared to, say, even La Manche channel, right? Because you have boats and you have all the other kind of challenges there and you have currents, but the ocean doesn't get as crazy as here. And the difference between swimming also a channel and around the islands, which at times we would get mile and even more away from the shore, off the shore, because we would need to avoid all the shallows and all the outside reefs. The ocean can get really, really, really rough with currents pushing you left and right. And you cannot just, say, that's it, I'm going to go in, because the coastline is rigid. There's sharp coral reefs sticking out and there's big waves. So you'll get torn into pieces if you just decided to go at any point. So you really need to know what you're doing. You have to be ready in your mind, kind of, well, I just have to go through it and see how far I go. And so that's what was very interesting, and how in a different way it compares and doesn't compare to channels. And plus also we didn't have any support, which was another kind of specific condition that we set on ourselves, that we do not want to have a boat. One was from logistical perspective, because having a boat, relying on a boat, would probably slow down the project, and that, but plus also we just wanted to try how far can people go on their own. And so we try to do a study, how much water can you bring in your suit and how far does it get you and are you okay? Because often we swim in the morning. We say we would start at 6 a.m. in the morning and we would have to be at work, or Steve would have to be at work operating at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we would just go for 8-mile swim somewhere around the island. It was interesting.
Was there any points that you wanted to give up, or I'm just curious, was there any danger points that you really felt like this is not safe, or your family was starting to worry, or everything was?
Well, starting with the family, half of the swim I did in secret. Because knowing that if I knew that if I told my wife Naoko that we were going to do that, I would probably have a bigger challenge there. So we had to sneak out a few times and sort of, we set long swim days for practice. So we used those days as a cover up for us to do the first half of the swim. So the first, 60, 70 miles we did like that. Dangerous, yes. There were days there was high surf advisory where we had 20-foot Hawaiian scale waves, and we had to swim out and swim in, and those were kind of interesting days. All those waves are not a big deal, because once you swim out and you're behind the break, it's not a big deal. But there were days when it was very very windy. But I think from all the different parts, and people ask me, about Kaena Point, which is the westmost point where it drops off to, say, 3,000 feet, and north and south kinds meet, and so on. It was nothing compared to when we were crossing the Honolulu harbor, which was our first day swim. We did not realize that, we actually have to swim through a channel where the big ships, come in and go out of. And when we got there was this huge sign of size of a building, basically saying it's illegal to be there. You cannot be in the water. And we were there after 6 miles swim, needed to cross the channel. And we had maybe 1 more K or 2 more K to Sand Island. And we saw ships on the left and right. And the channel is pretty wide. There was head current that we had, and it was very scary. So we're going to go. Then I asked Steve to wait. And the ship that was out, big container ship that was way out, looked like it's far, and it looks like they go really slow. But once they turn in, they come really fast, and it's really scary because I was, I never swam past giant ship like that. And, I didn't know if it can pull me under or not, and so on. So it was very scary, particularly when we waited for the right moment, we thought, and we started swimming, and we were in the middle of the channel. We see a big ship turning out because the Honolulu harbor is an L-shaped harbor. So there's a little stretch, and then it turns left, so we don't see. And as we were approaching the middle of the channel, we saw a big ship turning straight and coming straight on us. And so that was the scariest part, I think. I mean, of course, there were parts where we're told there's a giant shark next to us, or we saw something, but that doesn't really bother you unless you really get in trouble. We had a lot of man of war kind of days when we were stung left and right. But that, again, depending on how your body reacts, and we were both lucky that we reacted okay. I mean, it gets on your nerves and your system, and it hurts, and it's really bothering you. But it actually, I found out that it can help me sometimes focus, because I get my mind off swimming, and I have something to just work through. And so it helps us a lot, particularly on the windward side, which is known for that.
How did
so even today,
maintain, do you have any tips for remaining calm, or how did you just not, have anxiety break your rhythm, or what's your tips and practices for that?
I think it's breathing, but it's when you set a goal, it's good to set a big goal in anything you do. So it helps your mind focus. And I think that applies to business, family, and even swims, and in this case, like if what we did this case, what we had to do is we had 2 cars. So we would meet at the finish point. We would decide, okay, today we're going to swim 12 kilometers, for example, right? So this is our exit point. And we would have to meet there, park one of our cars, typically would be mine. And then we would hop into the other car and drive all the way along the shore, the 12 kilometers to the starting point where we left off the last time. You realize that driving 12 kilometers along the shore, it's actually pretty long distance. You don't realize that when you say do the same distance or 15K even distance in a channel, you see the islands, but you cannot really tell the difference or the distance. But when you drive by the coastline, how it's, and it's straight line, mind you, as well. So when you drive, it's actually even more, because you're going around and around those little, bays and so on. So your mind is really like, oh, okay, I do need to be focused, and you stay focused until you're there. And also, you don't know if you can find the landing, because it all looks the same, by the way. Once you're like one mile off the shore, and you have waves between you and the shore, you can even tell what the shore looks like quite often. So you really stay focused. So I think that having a big goal, bigger than you, kind of helps you focus and get over things. So you're just like, no, just keep your head down. And a friend of mine who is very achieved swimmer, has done the Ocean 7 and has probably the fastest time still, Hungarian swimmer Attila. He basically, what he does, he says, just when I cannot swim, I just remind myself to swim. So just put your head down, just swim. There's nothing else. Don't think about it. Don't make it very complicated, because once you start analyzing things, you can go all different routes, right? So I think keeping the message simple for you when you need to focus is what gets us by. And also ocean is another good thing. Is ocean is it's like watching a documentary, like National Geographic. So there's always something that can get on your mind. You can look at, and the visibility in Hawaii, I would say 60 to 70% was good. And in some cases it was wonderful.
What stroke are you using? The whole majority is freestyle, or
it's freestyle? It's freestyle. Yeah, that's the most relaxed, the fastest. Yeah, and it works best with the currents and waves and so on.
Did you and your partner engage in any kind of other physical training or weight training or yoga or anything else to build up for this? Or
no, we've been swimming for years now, right? And when we swim together as partners, we're very comfortable with each other. Actually, what happened to my friend, his shoulder was in a really bad condition, so he was scheduled for a surgery, and it ended up being 3 different procedures: reattaching part of his biceps and this and that and that, and shaving off some calcification. Then I don't know what. It's basically 2 reattachments and so on. Then he swam through this whole thing in that condition, so we couldn't really do much more. Well, but having said that, though, he's quite a maniac, and so he participated in the Spartan race. As you may know, there's once a year, I think it's Kula Ranch, the ranch, they organize this Spartan race, which is 3 different events. One of them is 10-miler, 5-miler, and whatever. And it's obstacle course through muds and all kinds of crazy obstacles. And it was a weekend, and he did it without much of a training, which kind of made his situation with his shoulder even worse. But he did it, which people say that you have to be world-class athlete to be able to pass through those things, because it's quite crazy and very particular certain exercise types. But yeah, he did that. I didn't. I just started running, but that's for my goal for this year. So I was just purely focused on swimming. So we do stretching, we do kind of exercise before and so on. But swimming was an ocean swimming kind of thing for us. We didn't necessarily go for the time and speed. It was more on focus and experience and kind of learning about what the human body can do and mind. So we want to focus on that aspect of it.
How did it feel to complete it?
As anything big, I'm sure you've experienced that, though. People have experienced the feelings before. I think the first time was my university after 6 years. I was so looking forward to the big day until the big day came. And then it's like, okay, this is it. So it was actually funny because the last swim was the first swim when we could actually choose the time and the current. So it was great conditions. And I told my family, Steve told his family, we told our friends we'll be finishing. And we said, well, maybe around 1:00 we'll be back at Kaimana Beach. But the conditions were so good that we were just flying. So we were stopping, we were stalling, and we still finished 1.5 hours ahead of the projected time. Which is what shows how conditions in the oceans can change everything. Right? And it wasn't a long swim. It was only about 5-mile swim. We still finished 1.5 hours earlier. So when we finished, there was nobody on the beach. It was funny that we started alone and we finished alone, which for me, it was symbolic and it was really good because it was just my idea. I wanted to do it. So actually, Steve initially said that he didn't want to do it. It wasn't a good idea. And 24 hours later, he called me, okay, can we start tomorrow? But I did it for just myself, to entertain myself and to explore. So not having many people around was okay for me. But it was kind of sad because we've done it and doing it again will not be the same. So I like to explore. I like to do new things. I could swim it the other way. But
how did the rest of I'm not familiar with the open ocean swimming community. Were they excited by this? Was this a new challenge for others to participate in, or how did they respond?
Some of them responded in a great way, obviously, because they know that it is not an easy thing to do. And for different reasons, the people are afraid, obviously. People know that it's physically challenging. People know that it's mentally and physically challenging. People know that just logistically, it's a nightmare, because you have to figure out everything. And there are parts that really people have never swum before, apparently. So it's just not easy on very many levels. And I think the most difficult level is that you need to find a crazy enough partner who is at the same pace as you and crazy enough as you, who will actually stay with you the whole way and be excited enough the whole way to go and do it with you. So people who have swum and they know that swimming is an individual sport, even though we swim in groups, is also always individual sport. So with what we achieved with Steve, we made it a team sport because you have to rely on each other. Seriously, you do when you do that, particularly when you're offshore. So, and with no boat around or anybody around, basically no lifeguards. So yeah, some of them reacted really well, some of them did not, and I think it's just a natural reaction because also I don't know if it's envy or it's just like whatever, you know. And we also kept it secret, so some people felt unhappy about the fact that we kept it secret from people, but we didn't know whether we were going to finish it or not, you know, how it was going to go, if it's even possible for two people without boat, if it's safe enough and so on. So we decided to communicate it out to the community 2 or 3 swims before we were finished. So that was also that kind of reaction that, you know, yeah, you want to be special, so we didn't let us know and so on. But that's okay, because for me, we didn't do it for fame or any recognition at all.
And Marek, what's the next big goal in swimming or running or anything?
I don't want to be secretive, but there are some goals, but I don't want to jinx them, so I'll keep them. But there are some islands involved around us.
Oh, great. Maybe you're going to swim Lanai and Maui or whatnot.
Yeah.
Imagine.
You almost hit it there. There's one more. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff around us. But again, that introduces that element that we were able to avoid by swimming on Oahu. That is that we can stay at home and do it in sections. Now, if you do any of the other outer islands, we have to kind of focus that effort into, say, a week, which will make it more interesting achievement if you do achieve it from the professional perspective or point of view, because it will be we'll probably be able to swim longer or do at 2 swims a day. So instead of doing 8 miles a day, we'll be doing 16 miles a day. So we'll split it in half and we come out, we get water and we go back in the water and swim. And so we finish double the distance and we can go every single day. So we can finish much sooner. So we can basically do what we did with Honolulu or with Oahu. We did in 24 swims. Maybe you can do it in less than 2 weeks' time, you know.
Marek, what kind of diet are you following?
That's thanks to my wife. Very diverse. I'm a rabbit naturally, but unfortunately I'm from Europe, so I like gluten as well, which is not a good thing for me, but I love vegetables a lot. So, and I also found out with these swims that when I had I'm not a vegetarian. I do need meat and all sorts of protein, but when I swam, I found out that when I had vegetable protein the night before, the swims were just so much easier. So my body was just so much lighter, so much well responsive, and I had no pains. So that's something to say to vegetables. But being who I am, I'm not ready or willing to be completely vegetarian. So my wife takes care of the diet at home. Not to say that I don't cook. I love to cook and I participate as much as I can. But when it comes to choices and what we eat, she diversifies what we eat. So when it comes to protein, we have, say, meat twice a week. We have vegetable protein like beans and stuff 3 times a week. We have fish 2 times, 3 times a week. A lot of salads. I don't eat a lot of carbs in the evening, but I compensate with some bread in the morning. But I do not eat breakfast, for example, and that's residual from my swimming times when I was young. That I used to do early morning sessions, so I didn't eat before I would go to school and have to wait for snack time. So I wake up in the morning and I don't need to eat. So part of the, I guess, what people call diet. So what is it called? Intermittent fasting or something?
Yeah, ketogenic
fasting. Yeah. So naturally I do it because I don't eat breakfast. So we have dinner with kids earlier. So we try to eat by 7 and then I wouldn't eat until I'm done with the swim. Sometimes I eat until 11 naturally. I don't feel like. I usually would start with an apple and a lot of water. Yeah.
Going back to Hawaii, you called it your island. What's your history with Hawaii? When did you and your family choose to come here?
So I came here from New York after 9/11. So I didn't mention that, but I actually lived in New York. That was prior to meeting my wife, Naoko. And that was when I finished working for a Japanese company in Slovakia. I moved with their job into New York City. But unfortunately, the project wasn't very good. So I ended up closing the job down right before 9/11. And so when 9/11 hit the towers in the town, there was absolutely no chance to find a job for an Eastern European without education in the US, and a lot to learn about the culture and how things work. So I picked up, I decided that first I needed visa. Second, I wanted to sync up with the US on the business side. So I found out that there's an MBA program in Hawaii that was ranked among top 20 in international business, and particularly with focus on Asia Pacific. And then there's a chance to transfer to top universities in Japan. So that was my plan. And I came out to Hawaii in 2002. So I did my GMAT in New York right after 9/11. And I came out in January 2002 to Hawaii. First time ever. I'd never been in Hawaii. I had some image of Hawaii, but not really. It was very blurry. Kind of didn't have a particular picture. So I came out here, borrowed some money, came out here and started going to school. And that was my first connection with Hawaii. Now, logistically, it didn't work out as well because my relationship that brought me over to Hawaii as well didn't work out. So I had to figure out my own life and kind of stand up on my feet. So I ended up finding a job on campus at the University of Hawaii that gave me tuition waiver, which allowed me to stay in Hawaii and enjoy Hawaii. And that was also the first time when I connected with the ocean, because I was extremely poor. I was living off $8.50 hourly wage and on top of my tuition waiver, which gave me about $900. Forget about surviving today with that money, but I had incredible time during that time. I was able to find a roommate. So, those good times was where you would pay $450 for sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with somebody and going to school and working and studying. And then I was asked to actually lead executive programs for the School of Business, which is ironic, being a regular program student, managing and hiring the same teachers for executive programs. But it was a very interesting experience connecting with the business community and the teachers community at the College of Business as well. And at the end of the 2-year period, I decided to transfer to Japan to Keio Business School, which is one of the top schools for business and just general in Japan. Although, unfortunately, on the world ranking list, they're somewhere around 40, 50, 60. So they're not very significant in the global terms. But in Japan, and the social aspect of that was quite interesting, and meeting people was good. So that took me to Japan for about 10 years. But I kept relationship with Hawaii through friends, obviously, who I made here, local friends, and also through Ironman and triathlon races, which was one of the ways for me to deal with the stress in Japan. I never wanted to be a cyclist, but again, another friend, just like with Japan, another friend from Keio Business School said, you run, you swim, you should start doing triathlon, you should buy a bicycle. So based on that, I asked him to buy me a bicycle, which I paid for. And 3 days later, there was a box in my office and I started cycling, and I ended up going for 150-mile bike rides from Tokyo to 5th station of Fuji and so on. And that was my kind of way of dealing with stress in Japan. But also a way to bring me back to Hawaii for races like Honolulu and so on Maui. On the Big Island, and also marathon in Maui and so on and so on.
And Marek, once you graduated from Keio, did you start your company then, or did you work for someone else, or what was the evolution there?
No, I didn't. I had to learn how things are done. So first I started doing the usual, right? So I started applying for jobs, and because it was a big name school in Japan, it was considered Ivy League school among the Japanese school, right? So we had interest from the top industries like Mitsubishi Trading Company and so on. And they ended up chasing me down, and I had interviews with them, and they offered me a job to potentially in the near future lead their energy business. But then they added that it was energy business with Russia, which kind of hit the wrong spots for me. And I said no. And so I kept looking. And I came across this small private equity firm, which really wasn't a private equity, but it was similar structure to that. And it had about 5 companies in their portfolio. And one of them was a business support firm that was supporting foreign companies with coming into Japanese market and setting up their businesses, getting visa and running up accounting payrolls, helping them with all sorts of things. So I thought that was a great opportunity, and they offered me a job first as a business development manager. And so I thought, this is great. I will learn how to do business in Japan. And so one day I can just do my own business. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So it was around the time when Lehman Shock happened. So pre-Lehman Shock, we were crazy busy. And so I took the company. I started as a business development manager. We ended up being general manager and the head of the business within the first 7 or 8 months, because the primary owner's son unfortunately passed away from leukemia, suddenly, 3-year-old boy. So he had to step out and focus on a charity that he started and just support sort of business development himself. And I basically was thrown into the river and had to start swimming with people and taking care of all the business. But we ended up growing from about 15 people, small shop, to about 150 people. So that was great. But unfortunately, I didn't do my equity homework, which I didn't know existed back then. I trusted people coming from Eastern Europe that when he called me to co-own and manage the business with him in the future, that would be still the agreement when he comes back one day. And so when he came back 2 years later and asked me, Marek, what are we going to do with you? I knew that was the end for me, because he decided to come back, and it was too good to be true. We're doing really, really well as business. And that was the trigger when I decided to leave in 2007 and set up my own business, which I'm still running now actively in Japan with close to about 60 people, and now as part of a global group, about 26,000 people around the world.
What was the culture shock like for you coming to the US after having studied in, I guess, Japan? And I mean, when you first came to New York, what was that like? I'm curious what that
was crazy. That was really cultural shock. First of all, we were at several different levels. First of all, was the cultural shock and the racial aspect of the society. It was incredibly frustrating and surprising, and I just didn't know what to think of it. That we were all learning about New York being the melting pot, and you realize, no, it's just different bins, and there are people thrown into those bins, and there's different areas like Harlem and Brooklyn, and you have different ethnic or cultural groups living there, and they're basically separated, and they do not really work well together, and you cannot say this, you cannot say that. And it was just, that was such a block in my mind for quite a while, to realize that, okay, now you've been thrown into a group of people, and there's a set of rules for how you have to behave and what language you can use. And unfortunately, I was thrown into the white group of people. But coming from an underdog white part of a society, but getting all the negatives of what the white people did to the society, is just how I perceived it. It was really weird. And then I have to take the blame for whatever happened in the United States by predecessors of my own race. So coming in terms that I have a race, realizing that I have a race, it was really, really, really weird, because until then I was considering myself, as they say in Japanese, chikyujin, so like the globster in a way, right? The person of the globe. And just because I was born in Slovakia doesn't mean that I have to live and die in Slovakia. I was born on this planet, so I should be able to live anywhere on this planet where I want, and as long as I respect everything around me and the planet itself. So that was one cultural shock. And the second was the speed of things and the lack of and this is just a big city thing, right? When you have a boy coming from a country, that people do not really care about people. And it was just like, come on, that speed, and people had to talk and people had to argue. People had to make that point at any expense, That was a big shock for me. So, and also a reason why I decided to go to school when I mentioned that I needed to sync up I needed to learn how to communicate, how to argue my point, even though I didn't feel sometimes like arguing. Why? If people want to argue, let them argue. But I realized that you do not make progress unless you really go with the flow. So that was a trigger after 9/11 that it's not just that. The lack of opportunities, basically, the city was shut down for quite a while, particularly for new people and people who needed visa, but also that I felt that I needed to sync up quite significantly.
So then when you came to Hawaii is such a different kind of melting pot. How was that feeling?
Yes, but if you go to School of Business, again, it's Asia, so it's a little bit like it reflects Hawaii. So there's quite a strong ratio or big ratio of Asian students as well. But even that was new to me, say the American Asian, right? So there's I knew Asian, by then I already knew the Asian, particularly the Japanese, but then meeting the local Japanese, the local Asian was another kind of good experience for me because I realized, no, they're not the same. They're kind of similar, but they're not the same. They're still American, and they're still Asian, but they're not Asian and they're not American. But there were also people from all around the country. And the software, maybe you feel it more, you see the difference or feel the differences in being an American. But for me, it was intense enough already. And we had people and people still would argue. And I was exactly, I was told in the class that if you do not argue, if you take participations in these debates and arguments in class, you will not get enough points to pass the class. So I had to learn how to raise my hand, or I had to just raise my own argument and just start, and it's difficult because we have language handicap in the first place, right? And if you have fast speaking, somebody opinionated sitting next to you, it's very hard to argue. And particularly if they do not have any sort of culture and, then they won't let you finish your thoughts. And you finally have kind of organized your thoughts in your head to say what you want to say, and the conversation changes in the middle of your sentence because somebody jumped in and they change and they have introduced another argument. So it was very difficult in the beginning, but good enough. Now, outside of the school, I didn't really have much of the outside of the school because I really had no money to, go out to restaurants or meet people or anything. So what I was able to do is a friend of mine got me a kite for kite surfing, fixed up some wakeboard for me, and I got a bicycle in a thrift shop, and I was able to put it on a bus and go to Kailua and kite surf for a little while and then come back and go to school between work and school, right? So, and in the evening study. So I really didn't have much of that sort of social life. My only social life was Friday evenings with students with what used to be Magoose on University Avenue. But other than that, it was work, some play, some lab work with my co-students. Then the school was between 6 and 9 p.m., which is another interesting thing about the full-time MBA program in Hawaii and the reason why I picked it. And then I studied at night, so I don't have to do things and do homeworks and projects on the next day. It was quite intense.
What do you think the best aspects of American culture are?
Never give up.
Is that a different philosophy in Japan?
Yes. There's never give up. There's never give up in Japan. There's never give up in US. If you have trajectory, you never give up on that trajectory. That's the Japanese approach. If there's a roadblock, everything stops, right? That kind of ends the narrative for them, never give up, because there's no more road. So there's nothing not to give up on. US is, no matter how many roadblocks you put in the way, people will change direction. People go up, down, left, right, front, back. Doesn't matter. People will find a way around it and will keep going. So that's phenomenal about US. And another thing is, which really I saw in New York, is how people in the US can come together when it really matters. It's you don't see that much in other countries. Like we talk about, now when I said we, I said outsiders, like people, a person who was not born in US. Talk about US, that US is very selfish, right? That people are selfish, that, people say, yeah, come to my house, visit me, and they actually don't mean it, da, 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 da. But when it really comes to it, when like things like 9/11 happened, it was just I was one of the first people putting the American flag in my window, which I didn't know what that means, but I was so proud to be there and to be proud of that moment, and just seeing that there was just too much from people coming, that everybody wanted to come together and help. And no matter what it is, what it takes, people would be out there, but they were throwing them out there and then just throwing everything they had. And I'm like, wow, this is America. So, and then there are many other things, but these two just stand out for me greatly.
Marek, and then maybe winding down, I'm curious about why you chose to move back to Hawaii from Japan. You're married, you have kids. Why did you not choose to raise them in Japan or Slovakia, or why the US?
I'll try to keep it short. When my daughter was born, it was exactly 1 month to the date when Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster happened. So there's one trigger right there. Another one is, for me, I know there are many people in Japan who basically tell me, oh, I came here for 3 to 5 years and tomorrow is my 25th anniversary, and they bow more than they should, and they bow more than Japanese, and it just become kind of awkward. So seeing those people, I always thought, I love Japan. I want to be connected to Japan for the rest of my life, but I do not want to become a clown, Japanese clown kind of thing. So I do want to keep my distance. And then also coming back to my roots, what I was just saying in the beginning, that I belong to this planet. I do not belong to Japan or Slovakia or Hawaii. So even when it came out to Hawaii, we called it Project Hawaii. And so I wanted my kids to come out of the very structured, materialistic society and sort of concrete jungle environment in Tokyo, more to nature-based environment, so they can grow up around ocean, trees, climb the trees. Little I knew about how materialistic Hawaii is as well, but putting that aside, at least it's much closer to creating a connection with nature for my kids. So that was one of the big things. And for me also, keep moving. I knew that I needed to keep moving. And I knew that by then I knew that Japan is well behind in many, many, many ways. And I needed to come to US and that Japan was losing its edge, not even just aging population, but with the Lehman shock, what happened after that basically the outlay of the Japan was no longer the headquarters of Asia for the world. So knowing that Japan will have to go through transitions, and usually takes thousands of years to transition into something, I felt that I want to go back to revisit US, because US, for its ability to rejuvenate, restart, reinvent itself, will feed, and I also call it the greed in the US, right? The greed that people want new stuff all the time. It doesn't matter, I go bankrupt today, I want to stand up tomorrow, shake it off, and get twice as much as I had before I went bankrupt yesterday. And that's the driver here as well. So I knew that there's sufficient energy in the society here that will be work as a catalyst for future development in the country and things. Putting society development levels and so on aside, I knew that Hawaii potentially would be a good place to connect Asia, my Asian part, and my Western side, and also be connected to developments in the United States.
I think it's interesting how I have a lot of what I would call third world or third culture friends, people who are kind of in between societies and cultures, people who speak multiple languages like yourself. And it's funny, they're often the most positive on the US. Because I think when I have an Argentine friend, and, she loves the US and obviously sees all the faults here, and she speaks Japanese as well. So she'd be interesting for you to meet, but she can see those downsides. And it's interesting because a lot of people, there's a pessimism with the US sometimes from abroad, but it's just interesting that the third world kind of people like yourself really see the benefits of each society and kind of ignore some of the downsides. I think that's a strength.
Oh, believe me, I don't ignore the downsides. So that's why I call it Project Hawaii. But if you look at even Europe, what's happening in Europe at the moment, and putting the war aside, I think it's just flashed out the issues that there are in Europe, the immigration, the incoherence, and that just basically dwelling on the old values that the whole world has to change, and it's driven by what's happening even in technology, because it just changes the way people live, think, interact. Societies will interact, how they perceive where they're from and where they belong and where they want to go and how they want to be. I think that even Europe is too slow to adapt to these things, and I think it's more getting into that. We're more in an open society, like everything becomes more open, and I think we'll head to that, and there will be a lot of transition. So I do see all the negatives, here as well, when it comes to education, healthcare system, because those are the dearest to us, I think, right? Like there's no future without education, and there's no, no good life without good healthcare system, and that's something that I just don't think exists in Hawaii, period, unless you have contacts and people who will pull you in and so on. It's just utterly frustrating. So there's those things and many, many other things. But at the same time, you can really do anything you want in this country without being judged as much as you would be in other countries. So perhaps if you became the third country citizen in a way, and you go to the third countries, from the same experience, you would probably see that as well, that and you probably have a share of experience of that as well, that you see the negatives, but you live with them because they're everywhere. You know of the negatives everywhere. Right? So, they're positives.
Yeah, I mean, I speak many languages, and I'm also, lost in the world. So I'm like you, cosmopolitan. I think one should be able to elect identities and choose to live and adopt cultural practices as one wants. At the same time, I'm a little bit concerned about kind of the globalization of maybe the Western model. Sometimes it erases. Like I don't have a problem with Japan keeping as Japanese as it wants. You know what I mean? That's what makes Japan special. So sometimes people really want to make it more Americanized, more Europeanized, or if China does its own thing, or if, I see both sides. So it can be important to be cosmopolitan, but at the same time, I don't like the whole world becoming the same place. That's kind of a loss of culture. But maybe that's not really a concern for others. Marek, what last question I have is, how can people find you? How can people contact you if they have questions with your swimming, your business, your language, anything?
Well, one is, and I actually don't remember it, so I apologize for that. So we do have a YouTube channel for the swims where you could actually see more about the swimming part of things, but I think it's around, I need to research. I apologize for not being even prepared.
We can post those in the.
But I can post those. I can post those links. So there's one YouTube channel, obviously. Then I have email addresses and I have phone numbers. I love to meet people and so on. So it'd be great to talk to people.